Random House Audio presents The Steel Wave, a novel of World War II by Jeff Shaara. Read for you by Anthony Heald. In December 1941, only days after the Japanese launched their devastating surprise attack on the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Japan's ally Germany declares war on the United States. Americans quickly unite behind President Franklin D. Roosevelt's call for action against the infamy inflicted upon our naval forces, and to most Americans the primary enemy is clearly the Japanese. But Roosevelt and most of his military strategists, including Chief of Staff George C. Marshall, recognize that America's interests are threatened from two directions. Despite the outrage many Americans direct toward the Japanese, the American military's first priority must be to confront Adolf Hitler. Though the American Navy and Marines will focus most of their energy in the Pacific, at the same time, Roosevelt and Marshall plan for America's ground forces to make their first strike across the Atlantic. By 1941, Hitler's war machine has washed over most of Europe. The armies of Poland, France, the Low Countries, Denmark, and Norway have been crushed. The British have been driven completely off the European mainland, their army nearly destroyed in the process. The British military and their American counterparts fully expect the Germans to invade the British Isles, a logical and strategically sound move. If the British are conquered, Hitler will control all he has sought in Western Europe. The next step would very likely be a strike across the Atlantic, and Roosevelt knows that America's armed forces are woefully ill-prepared for that kind of confrontation. As the German military commanders prepare for their powerful surge across the English Channel, Hitler suddenly vacillates. To the enormous frustration of his key generals, nearly all of whom believe an invasion of England will succeed, Hitler's order never comes. Instead, he orders his Luftwaffe to bomb British cities, killing civilians at random. Hitler believes that this assault on civilian morale will bring the British to their knees. In 1940, in what becomes known as the Battle of Britain, it is the British pilots who engage the Luftwaffe with extraordinary gallantry and effectiveness. Hundreds of German aircraft are shot from the sky, and Hitler's dreams for an easy conquest of England go down with them. Strategically and militarily, it is Hitler's first catastrophic mistake. In June 1941, he makes his second. Though he has signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, Hitler surprises the Russians by launching a massive invasion that nearly succeeds in conquering that enormous land and its vast resources. But, like Napoleon before him, Hitler finds that his army cannot maintain any offensive through the brutal Russian winter, which proves as challenging an adversary as the enormous Russian army. Though German troops close on Stalingrad and reach the gates of Moscow, they cannot finish the job. For the remainder of the war, the Russian campaigns will become an enormously costly drain on German manpower and resources. In the Pacific, Hitler's ally, the Japanese, wipe American defenders from the Philippines, occupying nearly every chain of islands throughout the South Pacific. With fierce determination, American naval and air defenses hold the line in the Central Pacific at the island of Midway, and American and British forces stem the Japanese tide, which threatens to wash over Australia and India. As the war progresses, the Japanese military leaders learn that they are not quite as invincible as they have been told by their emperor. In 1941, in North Africa, a German campaign to support Hitler's ally, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, becomes a theater of war all its own. The British, based in Egypt, engage in furious battles to prevent conquest of the Suez Canal and the oil fields of the Middle East. Their adversary is Erwin Rommel, a German commander whose energy and audacity have made him a legend. But after enormous success against variously inept British commanders, Rommel is finally stopped. In early November 1942, his army suffers a major defeat in western Egypt, at a village called El Alamein. His British adversary, newly in command, is Bernard Law Montgomery. Monty is a brash and disagreeable man who is no one's first choice for the job, but Montgomery's stunning defeat of Rommel gives the British a much-needed hero and launches Montgomery into the spotlight as England's most accomplished field commander of the war. As the British bolster Montgomery with a steady flow of crucial supplies, Rommel's army is increasingly ill-fed and ill-equipped. Instead of opening Hitler's eyes to the importance of the North Africa campaign, Rommel becomes a pariah, is seen by Hitler's henchmen as a bothersome defeatist. During most of 1942, as the British waged their seesaw war back and forth against the tanks of Rommel's formidable Africa Corps, the American military pours into Britain with the energy and resources to launch their own ground campaign against Hitler's Fortress Europa. George Marshall vigorously insists that the British agree to an American plan to attack straight across the English Channel, an invasion onto the coast of France. But the British are skeptical. They have already suffered humiliating and costly defeats and have endured far more casualties than the British people can accept. The British insist that Hitler's fortifications on the French coast are far too formidable to break, that the cost of such an invasion is far too high. Marshall and the Americans are helpless against British intransigence. No, they cannot wage war against Hitler alone. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill convinces the Americans instead to join the British in a new strike into North Africa to finally destroy Rommel's army, which will begin a campaign to clear the Germans out of the Mediterranean. After much rancor and debate, the Americans agree to put off their plans for any invasion of France. The British will supply most of the sea and air power for the North African assault, but the Americans will provide the vast majority of the ground forces. After much political wrangling, the decision is made to place an American in overall command. The man chosen for the job is General Dwight David Eisenhower. On November 8, 1942, as Montgomery slowly pursues Rommel's bloodied army, the Allies launch Operation Torch, the largest amphibious landing ever attempted. It will become America's first land-based operation of the war, and results in a relatively easy conquest of ports and territories in Morocco and Algeria, which are defended mostly by weak, Hitler-dominated French forces. The victory emboldens the Americans, who begin to believe that the war will be a rapid affair brought to a close by their superior arms and cocky enthusiasm. With characteristic speed, Rommel reassembles his army from their lengthy retreat and strikes at the Americans, who he believes are not yet prepared for a serious fight. The Americans first meet Rommel at Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, where inept and unprepared American commanders discover that Rommel's reputation is well-earned. Kasserine Pass is an American disaster, and panicked troops and their commanders fall back to safe havens in Algeria. Despite the success, Rommel is virtually ignored by the German High Command. Though he has become a hero to the German populace, Rommel cannot convince Hitler how inadequately his army is being supplied. As he tours the battlefield, he ruefully observes the enormity of the raw materials and tools of war the Americans have brought to the fight. No matter how often and how successfully he strikes at the enemy closing around him, defeat in North Africa is inevitable. By spring of 1943, his pessimism strikes one too many nerves in Berlin, and Rommel is recalled from North Africa. To bolster the sagging spirits and ineffectiveness of the American infantry, Eisenhower names George Patton to command of American ground forces. Patton is a fiery and profane man who shows every indication that he will only go forward on a battlefield. Under Patton, Eisenhower assigns command to another rising star, a West Point classmate who Eisenhower knows well. His name is Omar Bradley. Within weeks, Montgomery's forces are united with Eisenhower's, and the Germans in Tunisia are utterly defeated. Their presence in North Africa is eliminated entirely. But Eisenhower does not rest on his laurels. Immediately, the Allies plan for their next assault, which will
Sample complete. Ready to continue?